over personalize, right? And I think that's some of the risk with AI is like, you can personalize so much that it's creepy. And we don't want to be that. We want to build relationship over time. And we also want to really pure about like who we are as an institution. So I think it's important for students to understand that before they come here, right? Because what we don't want to have happen is that we personalize so much, so filtered that when they show up on campus, it's not the experience of what it's actually going to be here, right? So it's important for people who choose to come to the University of Montana to know that it is a stupid, beautiful place that is gorgeous. Also, there's like 4 months a year where it's real dark for a real
We're heading into it now.
Yeah, we're heading into it today. It's important for people to know that, right? You're isolated. You're in a smaller place. Like it's important, I think, for retention that we're really honest about what the experience is like.
Hello, humans. Welcome to the VineDown. Jenny. Hello, humans. Welcome to the VineDown. Jenny Petty, what an honor. You are one of my favorite guests. This is your second appearance on the show. I'm super excited you are here. You have been in the corporate world. You've jumped to higher ed. You've been a blogger, marketer. And I know this because we've texted in between soccer pickups. You are a parent, and now you're a VP at Montana. Jenny, is there anything you haven't done on Earth?
No, obviously, Emily, I have a really hard time saying no to things.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Jenny, you and I first met because I totally stalked you, and I actually looked this up earlier today. I sent you a message last February, and the message started, Jenny, I know you by reputation, but I would like to actually know you. Which, like, thank goodness for LinkedIn, because you could never walk up to somebody in person and be like, hello, I know exactly who you are. Like, could we please be friends? And then, cut to, we did one episode of the show together. We actually exchanged phone numbers this summer, which was a really big deal for me. I have it marked in my calendar. I'll be sending you for our first anniversary some paper. And we are presenting this fall, coming up in a couple of weeks at AMA in Las Vegas. So thank you for responding to that first desperate message of my fangirling over you.
I'm excited that we've gotten to know each other and that we are texting friends now, and / we are giving each other advice on conference footwear. So that's a big plus.
Yes. Jenny is referencing how I sent her a picture of my feet at the last conference, and she said she was worried about my ankles, despite them being cowboy boots, which felt very like on brand for us being Western women, right? Because you're in Montana, I'm in Colorado. I, in fact, wore my Western Snap shirt today in honor of our shared Western heritage.
I have a pretty amazing pair of cowboy boots that I'm debuting at AMA. They are actually called the Green Thunder.
I cannot wait. I will wear a more muted pair of cowboy boots in support so that yours may shine and mine will recede. Okay, so Jenny, this is all great news and super fun, but now I want to kind of bring it to a doom and gloom place, which is always super fun on the show. I'm curious if you can help me set the stage. You just wrote an article for Inside Higher Ed. You've written many, but your latest article is sort of about like the perfect storm that we're in right now for enrollment marketing in particular. And I'm curious if you can summarize the points that you made in that article. If you out there have not read this article, you should go do that. Feel free to pause the show and go do that right now. But Jenny will also summarize for us sort of the perfect storm of events that are coinciding that's going to make enrollment marketing really, really difficult. And then don't worry, we're not going to dwell in the bad place too long. We're going to get into what we're going to do about it. But Jenny, tell us the bad news first.
Yeah. So Emily, I wrote a piece for Inside Higher Ed about 4 trends that higher ed marketing communications professionals need to be aware of. I would say it's actually 5 trends, the 5th trend being the national narrative on higher ed. But everybody is real familiar with that one, so I didn't feel like I needed to add that to the article. But, obviously we have reputationally some big work to do when it comes to continuing to defend and sell the idea of higher education. So that's number 5. But the other 4 are, we've got this perfect storm. We've been so focused on the demographic cliff for so long that I feel like there's a lot of other things going off of the demographic cliff that we're not paying attention to and we need to be. So the first one is changing privacy laws. So we saw this happen in Europe with GDPR, a couple of years ago, and what a massive change that was for marketers over there. We are starting to see privacy changes here. Sometimes at the state level, we haven't seen anything at the federal level come out yet, but it's something that consumers are just becoming more and more aware of. And that's due to a lot of different factors. It's, one, we had Cambridge Analytica back with, Facebook, which in my memory is kind of the first big social media privacy issue that came up. But from that, I think people have become more aware of the way that their information is being used. And then in the current political climate right now, people are actually changing, women in particular are changing the way that they use technology because they are scared of what might happen. And so we've got to be really keeping privacy concerns top of mind and starting to shift the way we do our work so that we're creating trust with our consumers, trust with our website visitors, and keeping tabs on how some of these bigger changes might impact the work that we do. The second thing, Emily, which you're such an expert in, and I can't wait to talk at AMA more about this with you, is the search cliff. And so your audience probably is really familiar with this, but in marketing communications, not everyone understands the enrollment funnel. And not everyone understands the way that we get prospects into the funnel. And so just really quickly, for the people who might be listening who don't understand, higher ed has traditionally relied on name buying through ACT, SAT, College Board. There's a whole list of places where you can buy names. And, this is something when I first came to higher ed, I could not believe that higher ed was still doing this because in the private sector it's unheard of at this point. Like nobody's going through the white pages and buying names the way they used to, but that's traditionally the way we've done stuff. However, the availability of names is starting to drop drastically, and it will drop drastically over the next couple of years. And that's due to a couple of things. It's the test optional policy, so less students choosing to take the ACT, SAT. It's the privacy laws of the way people are choosing to share data. We're also looking at the demographic cliff. So we're going to have less high school students going forward, right? So I don't think most higher ed marketing communications teams are prepared for the search cliff. There's this really great 2019 report from RNL that showed that if you purchased 100,000 names, you would likely yield. So you'd likely have 131 enrollments from those 100,000. And then College Mind did that great report in 2023 that shows that's dropped by 67%. So now we can expect 43 enrollments per 100,000 names. And that's scary, really scary to know that we've been putting in the same amount of work, expecting the same result. Did I cover everything there, Emily? Because you know this world so well.
Yeah, I think so. I had an interesting, I'll call it a fight, but it really wasn't a fight. It was a collegial debate with an enrollment leader recently, and he said, well, we have historically enrolled X% of our class out of search. And I said, okay, great. How many more names are you buying in order to sustain that? And he said, well, a lot more, but that's not the point. I'm like, no, that's kind of the point. Like, that's the thing we actually have to watch here. But no, your summary is right on.
Yeah. And so then the third thing that I highlight in the article is just consumer expectations, which are changing rapidly. We are seeing students on our campuses expecting a consumer grade experience for what they are experiencing outside of higher ed. So they want things that are frictionless. They want fast. They want immediate gratification. They also have an expectation that products will deliver what they are looking for. And I think we have a lot of work to do in higher ed around product, which nobody even wants to talk about our course catalog that way, or academic offerings as products. But this feels like a safe space, so I'm just going to say it.
Love that.
I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to our product offerings. And I think we're seeing some of those schools that have just blown up, Southern New Hampshire, Western Governors, Purdue Global, who have responded to the way that a certain market is looking to get their education. So it's start terms that are varied. It's being able to finish school faster. It's getting credit for work history. Like, they are adapting the product in a way to make sense for what the market is looking for. And I don't think most campuses are doing that yet. And then, the fourth one is brand awareness. So last year we had a college or a university close every week, which was startling, but also expected at the same time. It feels like we've been waiting for this for a long time for the market to kind of correct. And what I think is going to happen is that it's actually going to get harder for schools like the University of Montana to drive brand awareness because the market is going to get even more competitive. So those of us who are left are going to be fighting for this group of students. And so I think we're going to see things like digital advertising is going to be really expensive and out of touch for a lot of schools. Building that reputation, or what some schools partake in the rankings game, it's going to just become more and more difficult to do those things.
Okay, so 4 things, and then a secret number 5 that you can only access here on the podcast, Jenny. It's the demographic cliff, the search cliff, consumer expectations, brand awareness, and then secret number 5 is sentiment. And rolled up in the sentiment, there's actually something I want to go back to unpack for the listeners. You said women are using technology in different ways. If you don't know what that means, it's sort of like a coded reference. And tell me, Jenny, if I'm getting this wrong. I think what you're saying is like women are using different or having different expectations about their use of technology, meaning like, look, if I think that I track my period on an app that tells me when I could be pregnant, if I go seek medical care in a state that doesn't allow it, and that's like of record of my electronic record, that might put me in my health at risk. Is that what you're like saying without saying?
Absolutely. It's things like that. It's things like location tracking. So women being really cautious about who's using my location, why are they using it? It's, even down to like, what are you looking at online? What information are you taking in? There's a lot of I'm not even going to call it paranoia because it feels like right now, a week from the election, it doesn't feel like paranoia to me.
Correct. Agree.
But there's a great article that I linked to from the New York Times that goes into detail about the ways women are changing their use of technology. That's in the Inside Higher Ed article.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for slowing that down. I just didn't want to leave something coded in the show that felt like, okay, like, yeah, you might hear that and just like have it roll over your head, be like, oh yeah, sure. Like women are using technology differently. But then you might think like, wait, what does that actually mean? Like, what are we actually talking about? But I think it actually matters. We actually did some data and reporting on, in a post-Roe world where students are actually choosing to go to college. But that's a sort of a different topic we could talk about endlessly. And I agree. I think around the election, things feel pretty different. And actually, the question I want to jump into then, sort of if knowing these 4 things and knowing that these things are happening at the same time, and I agree, it's really down to sentiment, the demographic cliff, the search cliff in terms of availability of the students we can market to, and the consumer expectations and brand awareness. I want to jump into a place where we're talking a little bit about filter bubbles. And I actually learned about this today in preparing for the show. I didn't know this was a phrase. It's certainly something that I have experienced, but I didn't know it was a phrase. And I learned that filter bubbles are like essentially, in my experience as this like liberal, middle-aged, white, woke-ish, trying to be woman in education, I get marketed to in a very specific set of ways. Like I experience the world with like content driven for me. And I just stay in this bubble that is filtered for me by algorithms. And that's what a filter bubble is. And I'm curious, like, as we think about sort of this balance between like, for students, we want to present them with this really like authentic experience and make them feel felt as marketers. But essentially we risk like lacking adversity. We lack any dissent in showing them just what they want to see. And I'm curious how you think about that in terms of like exposure to diverse experiences and exposure to messages around diverse experiences as you think about this brand story for the University of Montana. Like, how does AI reshape that role of the university marketing professional given the filter bubble constraint?
I mean, I think it ties into a lot of the conversations, that a lot of campuses are having around democracy, around how to partake in conversations that are difficult or make us uncomfortable and not become so black and white. And so I think more so when we talk about brand storytelling on the marketing side, we have to be really conscientious of that. I think of the mission of these institutions and what we are poised to do here. And I mean, I feel like I'm in the same filter bubble as you. Like I'm getting somatic yoga is delivered to me on Instagram, like and I didn't even know what that was. And I had to like look it up and I'm still not actually sure if it's actually a real thing.
I think it's essentially like if we get mobility in our hips, Jenny, we will not feel any stress in our lives. That's essentially like what but like I'm getting the same messages. We are a filter bubble. This show is a filter bubble.
Yeah, cures anxiety and belly fat is what I can tell so far. So, but I think with filter, I think you can over personalize, right? And I think that's some of the risk with AI is like you can personalize so much that it's creepy, and we don't want to be that. We want to build relationship over time, and we also want to really, really pure about like who we are as an institution. So, we have a pretty healthy protest culture on this campus,
Mm-hmm.
and that can make people kind of uncomfortable. I mean, it's definitely not to the like UCLA or the stuff you've seen on the East Coast, but we do have a healthy protest culture, and I think it's important for students to understand that before they come here, right? Because what we don't want to have happen is that we personalize so much and that we give them the filter bubble. This is a new term for me too. I'm very excited about it. Everyone should expect that I just drop it randomly into conversation for the next couple of weeks. But the filter bubble, we don't want it to be so filtered that when they show up on campus, it's not the experience of what it's actually going to be here, right? So it's important for people who choose to come to the University of Montana to know that it is a stupid, beautiful place that is gorgeous. Also, there's like 4 months a year where it's real dark for a real
We're heading into it now.
Yeah, we're heading into it today. And it's important for people to know that, right? You're isolated. You're in a smaller place. Like it's important, I think, for retention that we're really honest about what the experience is like.
So another way to say some of that is like we know we want to use AI and good technology in order to let students be their whole selves and show them that we are seeing their whole selves. And yet the constraint has to also be we're not over personalizing to become all things to all people, right? Like if you essentially like there is a risk in authenticity of your own institutional brand. If you're like, look at, I can pretzel myself into this and I can pretzel myself into this and I can pretzel myself into that. And then you end up not portraying yourself as an institution as inauthentic. And I'm curious, like, let's dig deeper into that. Like, what will you do? Because you all are using a lot of technology in a lot of ways. What will you do to make sure that you are either testing for, looking for, knowing when it happens that you're like, oh, wait, we've been pretzeling too much in the spirit of wanting to be all things to all people? Like, how will you know?
Yeah, gosh, Emily, that's a tough question because I feel like we're just figuring it out. Like we have all these new tools that we've just adopted in the last year. I had a session with ChatGPT last week or the week before that felt like therapy. It was so weird. It was so highly personalized that I was like, wow, that's a level I didn't expect to get to. And so I think one is we've got to keep our pulse on what is actually happening on our campuses. So the tactics that we have used traditionally for marketing research, things like focus groups, surveys, things like that, I think focus groups will become even more important because we want to make sure that the experience that we are selling matches the experience that students are having on campus. And that's something that I think, regardless of AI or not, has to have a constant kind of guardian around. It's like, how are we doing this?
Well, I think that's like not necessarily an AI problem, because you and I have had this conversation in the past. I actually can't remember. I don't think it was in the last episode we did together, but I think this was an offline conversation you had about like the stories that we tell ourselves in oral tradition might not be the things that are really supported in the data. And whether like we're just talking about data or we're talking about like things we learn or do with AI, I don't know that's like an AI specific problem, right? That could just be like the loud voices institutionally are telling you that like, no, we're well known for this. And it's like, no, actually, we're really not.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think some of that data can lead to really harsh, uncomfortable, honest conversations. And you and I had talked about that, in using the College Vine brand tool that you all rolled out. It was really interesting to me to see that, we really had one area at the University of Montana that was seen as being really excellent, which is hard for people to come to terms with because I think nobody wants to be told their baby is ugly.
Most babies are ugly. Let's just be clear.
I mean, early, like newborns look like little old people, but yeah. Um, so I think you're right. I mean, and I think as we have to be willing, especially to make sure that our brand is aligned with authenticity, and because brands that are not aligned with authenticity don't work. People don't buy it. If it's not a mirror and a bridge to what the community feels about something, it doesn't work. And so we've got to be able to be honest with ourselves about who we are, where we're going, what our potential is as institutions. And then I think, it goes back to that product thing, right? We talk a lot about differentiation in higher ed, and there really isn't that much differentiation, but we all want to think we're really different. And there probably are on every campus, one or two programs or degrees that are truly unique, and celebrating that is important.
Yeah, that's something that got trained into me. I'm literally on my first day of like professional work, having graduated from college and begun working with an old school enrollment consultant. Like literally on my first day of work, he told me, he's like, look, we're going to be going to a lot of colleges. They will tell you a story. They will each tell you a story about what makes them unique. They will almost never be correct. It is our job to figure out what really makes them unique. But just know, as you hear it the first time, it won't often be correct. And you just dropped a mental model that I know feels like easy parlance for you, but I actually want you to slow this down for the audience. You said something being a mirror and a bridge. And I'm curious if you can unpack that mental model, because I think those concepts are really important in marketing in general. But could you talk a little bit about what those phrases mean for the audience?
Yeah, and I stole this from Terry Flannery's book, How to Market a University, which is a great read if anybody hasn't picked that up. Right. So I think marketing on college campuses, marketing in any institution can go really wrong when your marketing leadership thinks they know what the consumer wants. They know what to do, right? Or they know what messages are going to hit. Like often we are pretty blind to what will actually resonate with consumers. And I think that goes back to the example you just gave of people thinking they know their story. Like, so when we did our big branding project a couple of years ago at the University of Montana, we spent a good amount of time with research. It was a very fast project, but a good amount of time with research. And through that came this brand platform that is so Montana, and it resonates so easily with people that the adoption of it was easy. And I think when you talk about the mirror and the bridge, all we did we did all the research, we took that input in, and then with our agency partner, all we did was reflect back to campus in a more organized way what they said to us, and then bridged where we were headed. Like he was like, okay, let's connect what you said about this place and what we actually are. And so that's the way I always think about the mirror and the bridge. It's like, that's what our job is. Our job is not to come in and say like, this is the brand platform, make it work. Like instead we ended up with work that's so much stronger because it was generated through community.
Right. Well, and I think that measure of like, and it was frictionless in its implementation is actually a really good test, because you're saying like, if we can make whatever audience, whether it's like audience of students or internal constituents, feel felt, and then also like show where we're going, though like where we're going then feels like the easier destination, and it, like you get more buy-in on that journey in a way that like felt easy. And I think that's a really good marker of like, yeah, you're not sort of like endlessly hammering square peg into a round hole.
I mean, that's not to say like any sort of branding work you do always has some friction or some resistance.
Nah, easy.
It's change, and change makes people really uncomfortable, but you have to be willing to like stick with it. And I think when we launched it, I was actually surprised. There were the fair amount of people who, didn't like the color, didn't like the font or whatever, which is always what happens. But we were overwhelmed with the amount of demand that people had for materials early on. So
yeah, I think that's a really good indicator. So now that you've like did the big brand project a couple of years ago, and like now we're sort of getting to this place of the perfect storm with all of the sort of enrollment marketing problems, those 4/5 things that you laid out. And now we also have AI sort of in our toolkit. And I'm curious how you would balance kind of like the efficiency of some of the ability that you now have that you didn't have at the time of doing the brand project some of the efficiency of AI automation with the need to maintain that genuineness in storytelling and the need to make that feel like really resonant emotionally. Like, how do you keep those things in balance with each other?
I think when the AI tools, especially like ChatGPT or any content tools started to populate up, the writers on our team were really nervous.
Like, will I have a job nervous?
Will I have a job? Yeah. And I think what we have seen over the last, 6 months, maybe even less than that, is them experimenting more so that they're teaching these tools to use our brand voice. They're teaching these tools what we like and don't like. But there still has to be a human element that is involved in making sure that the quality is there, in making sure that things are fact checked, and that job still exists. It's just that some of that early first draft work is being, outsourced through AI, and that is really helpful. But I think it's still, we have our brand platform and our brand voice and tone are really important to us. And so we're still having those experts, those writers and editors, play a big part in. I see this as really just helping us to find efficiencies and free up more time than these tools as of right now doing the job.
So let's say you can convince the average writer that like they're not out of a job and that their skills are really genuinely necessary. And yet you say like, and trust me, the use of AI will make your job a lot more efficient. In a dream scenario, what would you then have a writer go do with that found time? Like what then happens? Like what's the magic in the marginal gain of the time?
Yeah. So I think what happens is that they can flex in a more content strategy type of way. And so they're showing up in maybe ways that they couldn't before. So, maybe you had a writer who was focusing on enrollment marketing emails, and like that was the only thing that they had bandwidth for. What we're seeing happen now is that they can take one piece of content that's been generated and figure out a whole content strategy of how to use it in a lot of different ways. And so I think the role is changing a little bit in that it's not solely focused on just the output of a written product. It's thinking more strategically about the work we do, how it's funneling into internal comms or into the enrollment marketing work or into the reputation building work. I think it's freeing up that ability for them to learn more about that world.
Yeah, in the last 6 months, I find myself talking a lot, particularly to enrollment leaders and marketing leaders. And I feel actually this is like partial self-validation, but also validation of others when I say like, look, we've all done this exercise and where we've stood around with a stack of index cards or a stack of Post-it notes and like lined out the comm flow. And like many years ago that used to like fit on a table. And now we might do it in like on the floor of an empty room. And for some reason, like that exercise is like, people remember it. Like people remember what they wore that day. They remember what they had for lunch that day. Like they remember who was in the room. It's like this like seminal experience of enrollment marketing to have like lined out the comm flow. And then you stand back and you're like, we're done. We did it. And now I think what feels really weird as AI comes online, I don't know, it feels really strange that like we don't have to do that anymore. But what are we going to do instead? And it's okay to feel sad about not doing that thing anymore. So like there's this sort of human validation that I find that I need to honestly like offer myself because I spent hours and days doing that with many, many colleges. And for the people who have done that, like it's proud work to feel, and it's hard to put down. So I think looking for the silver lining of like, here are the efficiencies that we can gain. We actually can be more strategic in, story and complexity and strategy and become more proactive in our work, like all feel like good antidotes to that like sad feeling of missing that experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's, when I think about AI, what I want it to do the most for me is like clean my house.
Preach. Maybe I can do somatic yoga for us.
Yeah, do somatic yoga for me. I don't want it to summarize books. I want to actually be able to read a book. And so I think we have to find ways to make sure that we are driving these tools and they're not driving us. So I think, when you think about, because of course I've been through those with the post-it notes on the walls and the color coding, and like, God, that brings me great joy, actually. So I think we have to find ways to continue those activities because sure, we can build a com flow that way. We can also probably build a com flow in AI in 27 seconds or something. I don't know. But we have to find ways to still connect as a team and use that time strategically. And that's not going to go away. It's just maybe we're shifting our focus a little bit. Yeah, I know there's some grief that comes with these tools, which I hadn't recognized until you said that.
Yeah, well, I don't mean to like plant it and then like have it grow, but like I'm recognizing that in myself. And what I actually find a lot of heart in is like I can, and this is like where College Vine is heading, to a place where that same exercise with the post-it notes and sort of running out the comp flow and being like, okay, we did it. That's the comp flow. Like that's the thing students experience. That same type of exercise where you're shoulder to shoulder with the team can actually really be around like automating workflow, right? To say like, what jobs do we do that we would want an AI agent to do? Okay, first, I come to my office, I get my coffee, I do this, and then I do this, and then I put this thing in this basket, and then I walk it over to this office. Like that type of process match mapping, which is essentially what the Conflow mapping is and does. Like we can still do so much of that as we think about like what we can automate with different AI agents who do different types of work. And I'm like, okay, we can still do that exercise. It's not gone completely. Like I just get to apply it in a different way. So that feels exciting for me. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about like the writer specifically. Now I'm curious about, you are like the future looking CMO, Jenny Petty. What do you do in terms of like reshaping the roles, structures, rituals, and relationships in your office over the next 5 years? And I'm talking about like the ways you interact with IT, the ways you interact with enrollment. Like, what do you think is coming given what AI will reshape?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think right now what marketing communications professionals should be doing is laying the groundwork and laying the building the relationships with your enrollment folks, with your IT folks, because they are hugely important partners in this work. And no matter what comes, we have to keep that in mind, that we're not going at this alone, that these tools have a lot of different applications that can be used by a lot of different groups across campus. So I think right now I'm in the present thinking about, okay, how do we build the relationships so that we are testing and experimenting together? In 5 years, I really hope that my car can schedule its own oil changes. That would be awesome. But on campus, when we think about staffing, I think without a doubt, Emily, there are going to be positions that can be automated through AI. And I think, but I don't think it's that different from any sort of technological modernization project on a campus, right? Like, I mean, take for instance, like we used to have print shops on campus because we used to have to print checks every week for people to get paid. We don't do that anymore, but there used to be a person dedicated to that. And so I think it's the same thing. Any sort of modernization is going to change the way we do our work. But I think what it can't do yet, because this is where we're at right now, is it can't, in the marketing communications world, take on the creative, humanistic part of the work that we do. So maybe it will eventually, but I think we have to be really dedicated to continuing to invest in that side of our work.
Yes. And like not 5 minutes ago, you told me like I had a therapy session with AI that like I felt. So like what's the in between?
I don't know. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
What happened?
Well, I know. It's really confusing. I feel like I'm full of contradictions with this because I just don't know yet. But
you're allowed to feel that way.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you. I think we're seeing right now, it's like a pendulum swinging, and we're having to like challenge a lot of the things that we've used forever. So like the RFI form is a really good example, like the request for information form. we've been, working with Halda for about a year now. And what we're seeing through that data is, and Halda is like, I like to describe it as like progressive profiling using AI. So rather than building a contact form, all in one thing where you ask a student everything from their first and last name to what high school they go to, what term they're entering, what they want to study, what's the second thing they want to study. Some of those RFI forms can be 20 or 30 fields long. But what we're seeing with Halda is that people are converting at a much higher rate, like 700% more through the Halda tool than through the traditional RFI.
Just with different calls to action and slicing it up differently. Yep.
Yeah, and it's a little bit slower, right? It's more personalized. So it's building a progressive profile. It's building it by pointing the student to things that they could be interested in. So I'm imagining we will just see more and more of those tools popping up that are going to challenge us to shift paradigms that we have had for a really long time. So that flexibility, like I'm saying here, right? Like I had a therapy session with ChatGPT. Also, I'm terrified of like of AI taking over our creativity. And, but yeah, I think it's just going to be 5 years of experimentation and trying to be ethical.
Yeah, I hear you. So I'm hearing in that, like, and I think those contradictions feel, I don't know, they feel resonant with me particularly. I mean, again, like you and I are in an echo chamber probably, and we're in each other's filter bubble for sure. So I don't feel all that different. Like, and I understand that tension. And I do think like I'm watching sort of innovation in the space, and I'm watching sort of universities on the university side sort of stretch and want to innovate. I'm watching a lot of AI councils pop up at universities who are particularly interested in sort of teaching and learning like ethics side of AI for students. I think it's totally worth being very clear on having a message about, what your stance are, what the expectations are, if only to keep students like successful in their programs with you. But these AI task forces aren't doing a whole lot of talking about like, okay, what does it mean for like administrative operation, the operating system of higher ed? And I hope that they grow and stretch to do that. And I'm also watching sort of terrific innovation among the vendors. And I hope that this begins to, I think sometimes I talk to somebody at a school and they're like, oh, Emily, we'll talk to you because you're like a non-vendory vendor. Because like I can pass in the space because it's my friggin' 20-second enrollment cycle. And like finally someone was like, okay, you can stay. Like you clearly know what you're talking about. But like I'm still an outsider to this, but I'm interested in watching really the terrific innovation that's happening on the vendor space. And I hope that they'll like vendor averse or partner averse folks on the university side like aren't closing their ears to like what we on the vendor side and what we on the company side are able to do with like product teams and really smart data scientists, because I think there's a ton of really exciting stuff happening, whatever the vendor.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the other scary thing for the teams that are on the administration side is that trying and testing out some of these new tools comes with risk. It often means trading off known tools that you've used for a long time and trying something new. And so it can be kind of scary. And then I think also, for most of us who are in resource constrained environments where you're asked to provide an ROI on a new tool right away. And that can be in marketing, communications can be really challenging.
Yes. And any good vendor should help you do that. If your vendors aren't doing that for you, then you need to stick it to them. And I will set up direct conversations with anybody at a school who feels like their vendor is not helping them do that, because that is something that you on the school side should put back onto us on the vendor side. I'll say that till I'm blue in the face. And you mentioned, Jenny, a few minutes ago, you mentioned sort of the ethical considerations of like how we deploy AI. And I'm curious, as a sort of one of our last questions here, if you can talk a little bit about the ethical considerations that might have surfaced in your experience of doing some AI powered marketing that like maybe aren't talked about widely yet, or maybe that are the things that are just like creeping into the corners of your mind.
Yeah, here's a really good example that came up a couple of weeks ago. So UNLV has an AI president, and on their website, you can go and have a conversation with this AI president. And I mean, it looks like a cartoon. There's no
like I'm interacting with a person. Yeah.
Visually, it does not look like you're talking to a real person. But when we start to talk about accessibility, if you were blind you would have no idea that you weren't speaking to a real person. So I think we have to talk about identifying when we're using AI, making it very clear to the consumers. And I don't know the balance of this yet, Emily, because I know I interact with AI every single day and it's not being disclosed to me, right? But there does become a point, I think, where it's important that we disclose that. And I think most of us, if you went to school and did a liberal arts degree or journalism or whatever, you took an ethics class, and it's not a bad idea right now to go brush up on some of that, because I had kind of forgotten about, the 6 ethical lenses and like the thinking through that. And I think it's a time when marketing folks, especially probably enrollment folks as well, really need to be attuned to what it means to be ethical and what it means for their campus to live out the values and the mission that it says it's going to live out.
Well, Connecticut College really let me down, because in my gen ed requirements, I was a liberal arts student. I was an English major with a religious studies major on the side and an art history minor on top of that. And I did not have to take an ethics course. So I am out here on earth as apparently an unprincipled individual. What are the 6 ethical lenses?
Oh my gosh, I don't think I have them memorized. Okay.
Look them up.
You caught me good.
Okay, we're going to learn this together. Framework for discussing ethical decision making. Okay, here we see what they are. They are, got it. The virtue lens, the care ethic lens, the common good lens, the utilitarian lens, the justice lens, the rights lens. Okay, I am going to read this. Thank you to the institution who posted this article.
You should read that, but also the advice I give to anyone who needs a brush up on ethics is to just go rewatch The Good Place. It's streaming on Netflix right now.
You know what? I have watched that. Okay, so yes, we are in the filter bubble. Okay, now I do feel clear on that, right? That's like how I learned about what the trolley problem is. If you don't, I didn't know what that was. Okay, I'm now clear that I am not actually a horrible human. Thank you for reassuring me, Jenny Petty.
Well, it's complex though, Emily, like this is it's like when we started using social media, none of us had any idea of the ethical concerns of it. It was just like, woo, like party time. I'm going to share all my photos and all my thoughts in my head with everyone.
I mean, Jenny, also in our lifetimes, like in elementary school, it was like you couldn't use a calculator. You can't use a calculator for math. You couldn't use spell check for your admissions essay because that would be cheating. Like we have come a long way. So I think that top line is like, we live in a world of both and that's okay. I think it has to be, because that's where we are. Jenny, we could talk for a billion hours. I'm very excited to present with you soon and talk with you more. Thank you so much for joining us here. Another awesome chat with another human, Jenny Petty. Thank you for joining us on the VineDown.